Hey guys, and welcome to this tutorial on AWS Step Functions. What are step functions? Step functions are primarily used to execute workflows and orchestrate them in AWS world. A workflow could be a combination of different tasks which could either run sequentially or parallelly, and these tasks may or may not have dependencies on each other, right? So a workflow would be a plan to execute all these tasks together with all these dependencies addressed. And step functions provides us a very easy way to create workflows. It gives us a pretty helpful graphical view wherein we can create a workflow using something which is called as Amazon state language, which is very easy actually. And when you create a workflow or a step function using Amazon state language, it actually gives you a graphical view of the workflow side by side, and we'll see that in a bit. A workflow in step functions world is called as a state machine, and the various tasks which are performed inside a workflow are called states. And what you see here is an example of how you can create a state inside a state machine using Amazon state language. The state name here is hello world. The type of a state is task, and this task is actually calling a lambda function, the ARN of which you can see right here. So this is how you can create a state, and we'll see what are the different types of states in the next slide. Let's look at different types of states which are available inside step functions. Task state is basically used to perform some work inside the step function or inside the workflow. For example, if you're doing some calculations, you'd probably use a task state. You can actually call a lambda inside a task state, and that lambda will in turn perform some calculations or do some tasks. So task state is basically wherein you're trying to call a process or you're trying to perform some task. The next state is the choice state. Think about choice state as a decision task. So if your workflow has to make a decision based on its inputs whether to go right or to go left, the choice state would be the state you would be using. So it's similar to what a decision task inside a workflow or inside a flowchart does. Choice state does the same. Wait state is essentially a delay timer. So if you want your workflow to wait for let's say n number of seconds before it executes the next task, you would just introduce a wait state inside your state machine or the workflow. So you can tell the wait state to wait for like 10 seconds or 15 seconds, and it'll keep waiting until that time is lapsed. Parallel state. So let's say you have a number of tasks which you think can be executed in parallel. That's exactly where you'll be using the parallel state. So inside a parallel state, you can specify different tasks, and those tasks will execute in parallel. There are a couple of states which are called as pass or fail states. So a pass or a fail state will mark the execution of that state machine as pass or fail. Alright, so now let's dive into a working example. So this is our sample workflow which we would be implementing using step functions. So let's go through it and see what this workflow is doing. This workflow will take two numbers a and b as inputs. We will sum these numbers up, and then we'll see if the sum of these numbers is greater than 10. If yes, then we'll just print the sum and end the workflow right there. But if the sum of these numbers is not greater than 10, then we'll increment both of these numbers by 1, and then let's just wait for 10 seconds and then try to sum these numbers back again and compare the sum of these numbers again and see if the sum now is greater than 10. If yes, then just print the sum and end, or else perform the same process all over again until the sum exceeds 10. So that's our sample workflow. Now let's try to implement this process using step functions. Now if you remember the different types of the states which we discussed a few minutes back, so let's see how those states will fit in here. So the first block which is a plus b, here we are actually performing some task. We are actually trying to perform some calculation. We are adding these two numbers a and b, right? This block would be a task state in our step functions. The second decision box here, where we are checking if the sum is greater than 10 or not, that would be implemented as a decision or a choice state inside our step function. And then these blocks right there, in which we are incrementing the numbers a and b by 1, that would again be a task state. This wait 10 seconds would be a delay state, because here we are introducing a time lag of just a delay timer of 10 seconds. And then these other blocks, the print sum and the format input blocks, these would again be task states inside our step functions. Alright, so let's go ahead and log into our Amazon Web Services environment and start creating this step function. So before we actually go and create our step function, we would need to create some lambdas which would do these tasks for us. For example, we need to create a lambda for this block right there, a plus b. So that lambda would take the inputs a and b and would give us the sum as output. So it would give us a plus b as the output. We also would need to create another lambdas which would increment a by 1 and another lambda which would increment b by 1. We would also need to create another lambda which would do the print sum for us, so it will just print out the sum for us, and we would need another lambda to format the inputs to be provided to this block again. So we would need 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 lambdas. So let's go ahead and create those lambda functions initially before we actually go and start creating the step function. Alright, so I'm logged into my AWS account, and let's go ahead and create those lambda functions. So the first function which we'll be creating would be the function to add those two numbers and output the sum. So I'm going to use Python. I'm going to choose an existing role and hit create function. And I'm just going to paste a really simple code here. What this code is doing is it's reading the two inputs a and b, and it's adding those two inputs, and we are outputting the sum of these two numbers and the initial value of these numbers. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit save. So now if you see here, we have our first lambda function a plus b created. Now let's create another lambda function to increment the value of a by 1. So let's create that function. We'll name that function as increment a. Select Python. We'll choose the same existing role and then create the function. Okay, so let's paste our code, very simple code here again. What this code is doing is it's reading the input value of a, incrementing the value of a by 1, and then returning the incremented value of a. So let's go ahead and hit save. Now if we go to functions, we have another function created which would increment the value of a. Let's go ahead and create a similar function to increment the value of b as well. And we'll name that function as increment b. Select Python, choose the same role, and then paste our very simple code here again. What this code is doing, it's reading the input value of b, and then it will increment the value of b by 1 and return the incremented value. Go ahead and hit save. And if we go here, you can see our lambda functions. Now let's create the lambda functions for print sum and format inputs real quick. Click the create function button, and I'll name this function as print sum, select Python, I'll choose the existing role and hit create function. I'm gonna paste the code here real quick. The code is very simple. I'm just printing here the value of the sum. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit save. Function is created. Let's create one more Lambda function for the format input task. So what this function is doing is it is kind of preparing the inputs to be fed into the very first block. So if you remember our workflow, right? So this is the format function right here, and what this function does is it kind of formats the inputs in a way so that it can be fed into this block, which kind of aggregates the sum of A and B, and we'll see it in a bit. So let's go ahead and hit save to create this function, and we can see here that this function is created. Alright, so now we are done creating all our required Lambda functions. So let's go ahead now and try creating the step function.